Hey, welcome back to GBGuns. It's been a while. I was at the Antares Alliance event, then the SHOT Show, then got sick with the SHOT Show crud. Now I'm making a recovery, and there have been a lot of questions about the PPQ SC and what makes it different, or what's the big deal. I've got some other guns here to compare it against, and want to try to dive into that. That's what's coming up next on GBGuns. First things first, I don't work for Walther. I'm not a factory rep. Just going to be taking a look at some related guns and trying to help us draw some conclusions. I'm more than open to hear from you all what your thoughts and observations are on these things. Now, these are the four guns I'm going to compare against. The Q5 match, unfortunately, is kind of redundant in this case, and the gun buyer exclusive 5-inch PPQ as well. I just think they're beautiful guns, so I had to have them in there. So getting those out of the way, why these four guns? So the PPQ SC, of course, is the gun that's in question. Why is there that roll pin there? And what about the magazine compatibility? All that kind of stuff is what we're going to be diving into. I do not have a regular PPQ on hand, but I do have the Q4 TAC, which is essentially the same thing, aside from the front sight, plates, and threaded barrel. So this will serve as our standard PPQ for comparison. The Canik TP9 is, of course, the world's most popular copy of the Walther system. For those of you that have been in any sort of doubt of that, I'll show you that in a second. And then my old reliable P99AS, because, well, this is where the PPQ began. So let's dive in, and first off, take a look at the slides. So the slides are where the differences pop out the most on the PPQ SC, and what makes it actually more of a different gun, I'd say, than just a chopped down PPQ. First off, we can see that the space needed from the end of the chamber to the end of the gun for all of the operating, moving pieces is exactly the same between these four guns. So that's, I guess, a plus or similarity, if you will. The slides are also all the same width. In fact, they have no problem fitting on each other's frames. And they are the same height. What creates a little bit of a visual difference on the PPQ SC is right off the bat, we can see here that the extractor is internal, unlike the external extractor on the PPQ, the Walther clone, and the P99. They also, the slide looks a little bit taller on the PPQ SC, just at quick glance, because you don't have that plate there and the extractor breaking up that visual line. Flipping it over to look at the underside, this is where the big differences start to pop out. We get these lined up and zoomed in so we can take. So, just as a reminder, we've got the P99AS here, the TP9DA here, a PPQ, and the PPQ SC. Looking between the Canik and the original P99, you can see they're pretty much exact copies. The striker has this little tail here. That's the part that pokes out of the window on the back to let you know when it is armed or not. With the PPQ, they got rid of that, went to this closed off back end, and so there's no more tail on the striker. The striker got a bit simpler, but the striker safety spot remained the same, and everything else in the channels here looked pretty much the same, except for with the SC. I'm going to pull these two older ones out of the way, and we'll zoom in even more so we can get a better look at this. So I've rotated them to keep them in frame a little better. The bottom is the PPQ, the top is the SC, and here's where the huge differences start to really pop out. And my theory as to why that roll pin is in the SC is because this down in here is plastic. This is actually an insert, versus on the standard PPQ, it's solid steel. Now, one thing that is done for sure is reduced weight in the reciprocating mass on the back end of the SC, and that's part of why the SC cycles so much faster and why, although it is compatible fit-wise with PPQ magazines, Walther strongly recommends their spring kit to upgrade to the spring in the magazine so the magazine can keep up with the much faster moving SC. I think that quick movement also explains why the SC is such a pleasant shooter for being so short and stubby. Most guns of the SC's size in my hand end up flipping all over the place and being rather uncomfortable to shoot. I did not experience that at all with the SC. Found it surprisingly easy to shoot. My guess is the high cyclic rate and reduced reciprocating mass helped a lot with that. So we can see our striker is also different and narrower. We've got internal extractor and ejector here that are labeled for the caliber, which suggests that Walther will be releasing this exact same size platform in a different caliber. I guess maybe 40. Who knows if a 45 is in the works and how much internals would need to be different for that larger round. But considering that the slides remain the same external dimensions, my bet is you can change this inside a bit enough to handle the 45. So that's what makes the inside of the slide different and why we have that roll pin there, keeping all of this intact. You notice the striker safety plunger has moved considerably from up here to further back here. So that of course means that the trigger bar is going to be different. Let's take a look at the frames next. So this bit will of course be a little bit more difficult to film since the frames aren't going to want to just stay there on their own. The two on the left, the Walther P99 AS and the Canik TP9 DA, if you had any remaining doubts at the copy between the two, just take a look at those internals. Pretty much the same. Trigger bar awfully similar too. All right, let's get that out of the way. So between the PPQ and PPQ SC, you can see immediately that there is some interchange. So between the PPQ and PPQ SC, the SC being in the back, you can see immediately there are some differences in the trigger bars. We're missing that forward lump here, and that's because everything has to fit a bit smaller, though these dimensions are the same. Remember, we have things in different locations on the slides themselves. Hopefully that has pointed out some things that are different for you. Sorry, I don't have all the answers. I did, however, have some examples to do some comparing against, and can tell that the SC is definitely still the same Walther grade quality and engineering that is in the PPQ. It's just, it's almost a different gun. One interesting thing with the chop on the frame here is, of course, they had to make the interchangeable back straps shorter. It cuts off right at this peak here of the heel, or what begins to be the heel, most rearward part. But if you line up the frames side by side, you can see that those pieces actually end in exactly the same spot, which I think helps keep that familiarity in grip and feel, and that signature Walther grip and feel. But everything else remains pretty similar. I don't own a Glock 26. I'd be curious to hear from those of you that own a 19 and a 26, or 17 and a 26, if Glock went to such lengths or if they merely did a chop. I was kind of joking earlier and playing around. Oh, Glock's new 19X. There you go. There's your 19X from Walther. Looks ridiculous, but the interchangeability is certainly there. The parts all fit. And of course, there we go. Let me know your thoughts. I'm curious. I have been really pleased and surprised with this PPQ SC. Back with the P99. The P99C to me felt more like just a chop, and they made the frame just too short for me, just slightly enough that it felt a little flippy. The SC does not have that flippiness to it, so I'm really curious to see how these do out there once they start getting into folks' hands, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on them. Thanks for watching.